Hi, boys and girls. We're just going to jump right in today to Flora and Ulysses, okay? Flora was over at 2D's house trying to prove that Ulysses was as awesome as she says he was, and that he could type, and then she got called home. So, chapter 22 is called A Giant Ear. Her father was standing on the top step in front of the open door. He was wearing a dark suit and a tie and a hat with a brim, even though it was Saturday and summertime. Flora's father was an accountant at the firm Flinton, Floston, and Frick. Flora wasn't sure, but she thought it was possible that her father was the world's loneliest man. He didn't even have Incandesto and Dolores to keep him company anymore. "Hi, Pop," she said. "Flora," said her father. He smiled at her, and then he sighed. "I'm not ready yet." "Oh, that's okay," said her father, and he sighed again. "I'll wait." He walked with Flora into the living room. He sat down on the couch. He took off his hat and balanced it on his knee. "Are you in the house now, George?" Flora's mother shouted from the kitchen. "Is Flora with you?" "I am inside," shouted Flora's father. "Flora is with me." The clack, clack, clack of the typewriter echoed through the house. Silverware rattled, and then there was silence. "What are you doing, George?" her mother shouted. "I'm sitting on the couch, Phyllis. I'm waiting for my daughter." Flora's father moved his hat from his left knee to his right knee, and then back to his left knee again. Ulysses shifted underneath Flora's pajamas. "What are you two going to do today?" Flora's mother shouted. "I don't know, Phyllis." "I can hear you perfectly well, George," said Flora's mother as she came into the living room. "You don't need to shout." "Flora, what have you got under your pajama top?" "Nothing," said Flora. "Is it that squirrel?" "No," said Flora. "What squirrel?" said Flora's father. "Don't lie to me," said her mother. "Okay," said Flora. "It's the squirrel. I'm keeping him." "I knew it. I knew you were hiding something. Listen to me. That squirrel is diseased. You are engaging in dangerous behavior." Flora turned away. She had a superhero under her pajamas. She didn't have to listen to her mother, or anybody else for that matter. A new day was dawning, a girl with a superhero kind of day. "I'm going to change now," she said. "This will not work, Florabelle," said her mother. "That squirrel is not staying." "What squirrel?" said Flora's father again. Flora went halfway up the stairs and then stopped. She stood on the landing. The criminal element suggested that anyone truly invested in fighting crime, investing criminals, should learn to listen carefully. All words at all times, true or false, whispered or shouted, are clues to the workings of the human heart. Listen, you must, if you care to understand anything at all, become a giant ear. Picture that image in your head. Become a giant ear. This was the criminal element suggested. And this was what Flora intended to do. She pulled Ulysses out from underneath her pajama top. "Sit on my shoulder." Ulysses climbed up on her shoulder. "Listen," she said. He nodded. Flora felt brave and capable, standing there on the landing with her squirrel on her shoulder. "Do not hope," she whispered. "Instead, observe." She took a deep breath and let it out slowly. She held herself absolutely still. She became a giant ear. And what Flora, the giant ear, heard was astonishing. What do you think she's going to hear? Enter the villain. What's a villain? So in a lot of comic books or superhero stories, there's often a villain. "George," said Flora's mother, "we have a problem. Your daughter has become emotionally attached to a diseased squirrel." "How's that?" said Flora's father. "There's a squirrel," said her mother, speaking more slowly now, as if she were pointing at each word as she said it. "There's a squirrel," repeated her father. "The squirrel is not well." "There's an unwell squirrel?" "There's a sack in the garage and a shovel." "Okay," said Flora's father. "There's a sack and a shovel in the garage." At this point, there was a very long silence. "I need you to put the squirrel out of its misery," said Flora's mother. So what's she suggesting right now? "How's that?" said her father. "For the love of Pete, George," shouted her mother, "put the squirrel in the sack and hit him over the head with a shovel." Flora's father gasped. Flora gasped. She was surprised at herself. The ladies in her mother's romance novels put their hands to their chests and gasped. But Flora was not a gasper. She was a cynic. Flora's father said, "I don't understand." Flora's mother cleared her throat. She uttered the blood soaked words again. She said them louder. She said them more slowly. "You put the squirrel in the sack, George. You hit the squirrel over the head with the shovel." She paused. "And then," she said, "you use the shovel to bury the squirrel." Put the squirrel in a sack? Hit the squirrel over the head with a shovel? Said Flora's father. "Oh, Phyllis, no!" "Yes," said Flora's mother. "It's the humane thing to do." Flora understood that she had made a mistake in thinking that William Spiver was anybody important. Everything was coming into sharp and terrifying focus. The story was starting to make sense. Ulysses was a superhero, probably, and Phyllis Buckman was his arch nemesis, definitely. Wholly unanticipated occurrences. So do you think Flora's mom is right in saying that the father should take care of Ulysses and get rid of him? And based on this picture, how do you think Flora's father feels about that? Look at his face. So, based on that chapter, who would be the villain? Stalked, chased, threatened, poisoned, etc. He should have been shocked, but he wasn't, not really. It was a sad fact of his existence as a squirrel that there was always someone, somewhere, who wanted him dead. In his short life, Ulysses had been stalked by cats, attacked by raccoons, shot at by BB guns, slingshots, and bow and arrow. Granted, the arrow was made of rubber, but still it had hurt. He had been shouted at, threatened, and poisoned. He'd been flung ears over tail by a stream of water ensuing from a garden hose turned to full force. Once at the public picnic grounds, a small girl had tried to beat him to death with her enormous teddy bear. And last fall, a pickup truck had run over his tail. Truthfully, the possibility of getting hit over the head with a shovel didn't seem that alarming. Life was dangerous, particularly if you were a squirrel. In any case, he wasn't thinking about dying. He was thinking about poetry. This is what Tootie had said he had written. Poetry. He liked the word, its smallness, its density, the way it rose up at the end as if it had wings. Poetry. "Don't worry," said Flora. "You're a superhero. This malfeasance will stop." Ulysses dug his claws into Flora's pajamas to keep his balance on her shoulder. "Malfeasance," said Flora again. "Poetry," thought Ulysses. Flora's father's car seat smelled like butterscotch and ketchup, and Flora was in the back seat where the smell of butterscotch and ketchup was most powerful. She had a bootsy boot shoebox with Ulysses in it on her lap, and she was feeling carsick even though the car wasn't moving yet. She was also feeling the tiniest bit overwhelmed. Things in general were pretty confusing. For instance, here was Ulysses sitting in a shoebox, knowing that there was a shovel in the trunk of the car and that the man driving the car had been instructed to whack him over the head. And the squirrel didn't look worried or afraid. He looked happy. And then there was Flora's mother, the person who had given Flora the shoebox to protect your little friend on his journey. "We'll just put his washcloth in here as a comfy blanket." She was standing at the door, smiling and waving goodbye to them as if she weren't truly a murder-planning arch-nemesis. Talk about the darkness of 10,000 hands. Nothing was as it seemed. Flora looked down at the squirrel. Of course, he was not what he seemed either. And that was a good thing, an incandesto thing. Flora felt a shiver of belief, of possibility pass through her. Her parents had no idea what kind of squirrel they were dealing with. Her father put the car in reverse. As he backed out of the driveway, Flora saw William Spiver standing in Tootie's front yard. He was looking up at the sky. He turned his head slowly in the direction of the car, and his glasses flashed in the sun. Tootie appeared. She was waving one of the pink gloves as if it were a flag of surrender. Stop the car, she shouted. Step on the gas, Flora said to her father. She did not want to talk to Tootie, and she definitely did not want to talk to William Spiver. Why not? Why wouldn't she want to talk to them right now? She didn't want to see herself reflected in his dark glasses. She had her own thoughts about the random and confusing nature of the universe, and she didn't need his too. Also, she was in a hurry. There was a murder to stop, a superhero to mentor, villains to vanquish, darkness to eradicate. She couldn't waste time trading stupid thoughts with William Spiver. Florabelle, shouted William Spiver, almost as if he were reading her mind. I've had some interesting thoughts. He ran toward the car and fell into the bushes. Great Aunt Tootie shouted, I need your assistance. What in the world is going on? Said her father, and he slammed on the brakes. It's just a temporary blind boy, said Flora, and Mrs. Tickham from next door. She's his aunt, his great aunt. Never mind, it doesn't make a difference. Keep going. But it was too late. Tootie had helped William Spiver out of the bushes, and the two of them were walking toward the car. William was smiling. Hello, her father called out to them. I'm George Buckman. How do you do? Flora's father introduced himself to everyone all the time, even if the person was someone he'd already met. It was an annoying and extremely persistent habit. Hello, sir, said William Spiver. I'm William Spiver. I would like to speak to your daughter, Florabelle. I don't have time to talk to you right now, William Spiver, said Flora. Great Aunt Tootie, can you assist me? Will you take me to Flora's side of the vehicle? Please excuse me while I escort my extremely disturbed and neurotic child to the other side of the car, said Tootie. Certainly, certainly, said Flora's father. And then he said to absolutely no one, George Buckman, how do you do? Flora sighed. She looked down at Ulysses, considering the human beings she was surrounded by. Believing in a squirrel seemed like an increasingly reasonable plan of action. I wanted to apologize, said William, who was now standing beside her window. For what? Said Flora. It wasn't the worst poetry I'd ever read. Oh, said Flora. Also, I'm sorry that I wouldn't take my glasses off when you asked me to. Take them off now then, said Flora. I can't, said William Spiver. They've been glued to my head by evil forces beyond my control. You lie, said Flora. Yes, no, I don't, I do. I'm engaging in hyperbole. It seems as if the glasses have been glued to my head. He lowered his voice. Actually, I'm afraid that if I take my glasses off, the whole world will unravel. That's stupid, said Flora. There are bigger things to worry about. For instance, Flora realized that she was going to say something to William that she hadn't intended to say. The words were out of her mouth before she could stop them. Do you know what an arch nemesis is? She whispered. Of course I do, William whispered back. Right, said Flora. Well, Ulysses has got one. It's my mother. William's eyebrows rose up above his dark glasses. Flora was pleased to note that he looked properly surprised and shocked. Speaking of Ulysses, said Tootie, I have some poetry that I would like to recite to him. Are you sure that now is the time for a poetry recitation? Said William. Ulysses sat up straighter in his booty boots shoebox. He looked at Tootie and he nodded. I was moved by your poetry, said Tootie to the squirrel. Ulysses puffed up his chest. And I have some poetry that I would like to recite to you in honor of the recent transformations in your life. Tootie put a hand on her chest. This is Rook, she said. You sent out beyond your recall, to the limits of your longing, embody me. Flare up like flame and make big shadows I can move in. Ulysses stared at Tootie, his eyes bright. Flare up like flame, said Flora's father from the front seat. Yeah, that is moving, yes, that's quite lovely, flaring up like flame. Thank you so much. We have to be on our way now. But will you return? Said William. Flora looked up and saw William Spiver's words hanging in the air above him like a small tattered flag. But will you return? I'm just spending the afternoon with my father, William, she said. It's not like I'm heading off to the South Pole. Terrible Things Can Happen to You had done an extensive piece on what to do if you were stranded at the South Pole. Their advice could be summed up in 3 simple words: eat seal blubber. It was astonishing, really, what people could live through. Flora felt cheered up all of a sudden, just thinking about eating seal blubber and doing impossible things, surviving when the odds were against her and her squirrel. They could figure out a way to outwit the arch nemesis. They would triumph over the shovel and the sack, and they would triumph together like Dolores and Incandesto. I'm glad, said William. I'm glad that you're not going to the South Pole, Flora Belle. Flora's father cleared his throat. George Buckman, he said, how do you do? It was nice to meet you, sir, said William. Remember those words, said Tooty. Flare up like flame, said Flora's father. I was speaking to the squirrel, said Tooty. Of course, said Flora's father. My apologies, the squirrel. I will see you again, said William. Beware the arch nemesis, said Flora. I'll see you again, said William. We're off to fight evil, said Flora as her father backed the car out of the driveway. William waved at the car. I'll see you again. He seemed so stuck on the idea of seeing her again that Flora didn't have the heart to tell him that he was waving in the wrong direction. All right, so thinking about kind of the characters in our story and how they're developing, okay? Is Flora right in saying that her mother is Ulysses' arch nemesis? And are the words arch nemesis and villain connected to each other? Like, do they have similar meaning? Okay. And thinking about what Flora's mom asked her dad to do with Ulysses, she thinks that the squirrel's diseased, and so the squirrel needs to go. How do you think that would affect Flora and her attitude or her feelings or the way that she's interacting with people in the story? Okay, so what impact would her mom's actions have on her at that point? See you soon.